Hello, and welcome to episode number 264 of the LSR podcast. My name is Matt Brown, joined each and every week by the brightest minds in all of the gaming industry. With me, I have two of those in Sam McQuillan and the triumphant return of Matt Waters to the podcast here after a few weeks off. So, Matt, welcome back, buddy. We're going to get your opinion on several things here. We're going to talk some Genius Sports. We're going to talk some DraftKings in the prediction market. Where does everybody lie when it comes to prediction markets? What do they think about that? The state roundup as usual, and the old Safe Bet Act is coming back around here. But Matt, let's kick things off here with some sad news, and I don't think unexpected news, but if you're living in Georgia, I guess we can say there's always next year, but maybe not.
There have been a lot of next years for Georgia. That's the issue, Matt. Ray Charles wrote Georgia on my mind, and it's going to be on the mind of all of these lobbyists that need to figure out how they're going to crack the code in Georgia, because it's not like we can even point to just one issue in Georgia. We had just straight up disagreements between Republicans and Democrats for a couple of years. There's the issue of whether Georgia actually requires a constitutional amendment or not in order to add sports betting. And then of course it's a southern state, so you have a very strong religious opposition to it as well. There's a lot going on in Georgia, and there doesn't seem to be just one thing that will fix it. What failed this year was a bill that would have required a constitutional amendment and therefore a vote. And so if we are putting a positive spin on this thing, Matt, sportsbooks would not have gotten off the ground until 2027 anyway. And so if they legalize it next year, we're still on the same timeline. But that is obviously not good enough for the people in Georgia that want to bet on sports legally. And it's a shame. I mean, just about everybody has a sports betting bill in. They could find themselves surrounded soon enough by legal states. We know that there's a passion for it in Georgia, right? We had data from GeoComply that said this NFL season, it was 100% more people that tried to access those legal online sports books and just couldn't. So we know the demand is there. We know that the sports teams want it. We know, obviously, the sports books want it. We know a lot of people want it. There's just enough people that don't, that it is going to take at least one more year.
Yeah, and Sam, we look at this and where Atlanta is geographically located as well. Some of these other states that kind of drug their feet and had neighboring states that did have legalized sports betting, some of those big cities were fairly close to the border, and like we were just assuming there were going to be people crossing over. Well, Atlanta's not really close to Tennessee. It's definitely not close to Florida, and there is no sports betting in South Carolina or in Alabama. And so whenever we kind of look at this, I mean, it's one of two things, right? I mean, they're either playing DFS plus or they're betting offshore with bookies, right? I mean, that's what's kind of going on here. We can't assume hardly anybody in the biggest city within that state is actually betting legally.
Yeah, because you can't legally do it. And to your point, I don't think anyone is driving, the 3 hours or however much it takes to get to one of those legal states. You talk about the demand for legal sports betting going up. What happens after people Google DraftKings or FanDuel or BetMGM or Caesars or ESPN Bet, and then they find out they can't do it there. When you're out of legal options, you turn to, like you said, gray options, or in some cases, illegal options. I wonder, there's a conference in New York this week talking about where some numbers were thrown out about how the demand for offshore sports betting has gone up as well, not just along with legal. And, as the legal industry becomes more and more prevalent, people start thinking about sports betting more. So I would not be shocked if, the demand for offshore sports betting has gone up. People are going to all these other websites. And to your point about the location, this is where one of those DFS Plus companies is headquartered. Prize Picks is in Atlanta. They've, that's by no mistake. They're in a huge state, probably, one of the biggest outside of Texas and California, where there are no legal options, and they've been allowed to set up shop there. And they're a very popular app down there for a reason. I imagine, I'm in no one's mind, but I imagine the DFS Plus industry has to be happy that, sports betting is not being legalized in Georgia anytime soon, at least. So yeah, Georgia, you scratch your head. It's one of those few big states where now you look around and you're surrounded by all these legal options.
Yeah. And, Matt, I say this often, and I've actually talked to some people on the side who are like, man, I really wish you wouldn't say that on the pod, but I honestly think it's true. It's like, if you're in a state like Georgia, like, I guess I don't blame you for betting offshore. I mean, like if you want to bet and like they're not going to allow you to do it legally, it's like, you know, where we kind of start saying like, guys, all right, here's all the reasons why, if you live in all of these states with legal market, like this is why you should do this. You're protected. You've got this, you've got that, you got whatever. I understand why the DFS Plus is wildly popular in Georgia. Like, I know that I still have friends that live there. Literally all of them do it, right? And like probably, and they still kind of dabble at least a little bit on the offshore markets and things. And it's like, well, I mean, it's hard for me to like go, dude, just don't bet at all. You know, while I'm talking about all these bets that I'm making and all this and how fun this is, and all of our friends that live all over the country that do live in legal markets are like talking betting on a text chain. You should just sit it out and just sit there and wait for a few years until it happens. So it's like, you know, it's this big conundrum for me, because I'm like, you know, I understand why they're doing what they're doing.
Yeah, and you know what, Matt? It's interesting because, and Sam, you kind of brought it up, but you know, there was a point where the U.S. sports betting industry, where marketing shifted from state-based to national, and now you get the national ads for everyone, all the companies. I'm not going to call out just a few; all of them do it. So yeah, you could be on Google trying to get to this one or that one, and then you may be clicking on a link that will take your bet, and you may have no idea that it's not a legal sports book. There was a study by the AGA a couple years ago that said it was like 60% of people that thought they were betting legally actually were using offshore websites. Yeah. So yeah, it's hard to just point at someone and be like, come on, how can you do that? They may not know. Yeah. And if they don't have another option, that's, you know, people start to look for it.
One of the sites was literally Bet US. You know, I mean, that sounds legal. I mean, that does. It sounds legal. It's Bet US. Yep. All right, I know, whatever. Sounds great. So, you know, sorry, Georgia. And like we said, doesn't look like it's happening anytime soon there. So, you know, come on out to Vegas, you know, buy the plane ticket, direct flights on Delta, you know, from Atlanta. So just come on out and we'll take your bets out here until you can get something done. Sam, you have a story up over at LSR about Genius Sports.
Yeah, Genius Sports, one of the more interesting companies to cover. They operate in this betting technology space where they're not a sports book, but they work with the sports books and the leagues on essentially technology they can use to make more money off of sports betting when it all comes down at the end of the day. And one of the really interesting things about what happened in their fourth quarter call was this was a fourth quarter now where the NFL was historically bad. Sportsbooks everywhere were telling investors, hey, like, we know it was a really bad quarter, but this kind of thing never happens. I think DraftKings put out some information saying that, you know, it was like one of the worst regular seasons since like before 1980 or something like that. So in the industry, people look at it as a headwind, something that won't happen again, or at least probability wise shouldn't. But for a company like Genius Sports, investors were really keen on them showing that they're not really reliant on the results of sports at the end of the day, because they did a good job restructuring a bunch of their contracts they had with sports books and had with the leagues, where it's less reliant on the outcome or the hold rate, like the revenue that comes after the handle and everything. And it's more about the contract itself, what they're giving there. Live betting has been a big indicator of good things to come in this space. Again, that's one of those new kind of frontier sports books are slowly but surely moving into, after the whole same game parlay craze was like a big focus. It's still a big focus, but now they're treating that as another sort of frontier. And that takes a lot of technology. It takes, getting rid of latency times, minimizing the delay between the broadcast and the sports book, and building more product around that feed. I think a lot of companies are in this are kind of in this position right now where they're working on the product. Even in some cases, the technology's gotten a lot better, but they're holding off on marketing it. And Genius Sports is right in the front of that. Their betting technology revenue was up 48% in the fourth quarter, which, you know, despite them missing on some other big metrics, investors were really happy with it. Now the stock is not doing as well as it was because of other things going on in the world and domestically, but it was a better reaction than I would have thought originally to seeing the headline that they lost revenue overall, or revenue wasn't as high as they expected it overall, and losses were a little wider. But betting technology is a huge segment going forward for them.
Matt, we talk a lot here on the podcast about stuff that may fall into the gray area. And it seems like we talked a lot about that with the DFS Plus stuff. And before that, I mean, listen, this has been going on all the way back since the online poker days as to, is it legal? Is it not? Is it technically legal, even though it's kind of a loophole type situation? And so here we are with the prediction markets, which is the new topic that we seem to talk about every week on the podcast here. And I think something of note that's pretty interesting is that one of the major sports books out there at least had their eyes kind of set on this before we even knew about it.
Yeah, we learned this week, it was reported by the Closing Line newsletter, that DraftKings has a pending application with the regulator of the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. Now, that may sound really fancy. It is basically a platform. It's the platform that allows election betting. And DraftKings is now trying to get on it with sports betting predictions. It's not really sports betting. It is still a prediction market. And they're not the first to do it, right? We know that Kalshi launched. We know that Robinhood was interested. We know that Crypto.com wanted to get into it. And it kind of came to such a head there that the CFTC is having a public stakeholder meeting right now. They're taking comments. They're having one. It should be later this month. And then we should know next month about whether sports are going to be allowed to stay on those platforms or not. Right now, it's a question of, does sports betting, sports predictions, does anything with a sports event, does that constitute gaming? Because gaming is not allowed with the CFTC products. But if they decide that it is not gaming, then it would be allowed. And look, DraftKings, this application was last July. And you can't blame them for wanting to be in front of things. Right now, if you go to Kalshi right now, they are offering so many predictions markets on what's happening in the conference tournaments, and it'll be the same for March Madness. And if you are in California, Florida, Texas, why wouldn't you be checking that out? I'd be checking it out. You're hearing that this is actually an okay thing to do now. Like, it doesn't have the stigma of offshore. This is technically a different way to do it, but you can still get the same kind of feeling and same kind of outcome from it. So why wouldn't DraftKings want to be in all 50 states, including those huge states? It's good business sense. And it makes sense that they haven't really done anything because we just don't know what the outcome will be. But if sports are allowed on the platform, Matt, I can't imagine how many folks may want to jump into the space and try to do something with it.
Yeah, Sam, I mean, a company like DraftKings and FanDuel, where the brand recognition is certainly super high. You look at the states like Texas and California where they're not able to get a piece of the pie right now. This would at least open the door. They have massive email lists of all the DFS players that they've had over the years. So being able to directly market to those people makes perfect sense. So, Sam, what is kind of just the general feeling out there amongst everybody with prediction markets?
I wish I had a more decisive answer, but it's pretty much just uncertainty. Like, to Matt's point, DraftKings, like, why would they not get ahead of this? But they haven't launched it yet. Everyone's kind of waiting on the CFTC to make some sort of decision. And it becomes even more complicated because you then have to ask the question of, are they allowed to make this decision? Nevada says that, hey, you're not a gaming regulator. This is not your purview. In the comments, one Congresswoman, Dina Titus from Nevada, obviously has some interests in protecting the gaming industry. She essentially said the same thing. She said, you're not a gaming regulator, so why would you be doing this kind of thing? There's a lot of comments saying the same thing. Some of the other comments from the industry, as well as the National Council on Problem Gaming, I always think it's interesting whenever they align with whatever the AGA says, because they're kind of opposite. They think that allowing every state to do this and allowing these companies to do this, you're not going to be able to give consumers the same protections, the same responsible gaming measures, which is one of the components we talk about when we talk about the tremendous amount of paperwork, license approving process, license fee, taxes. Like, a big portion of all that complication that makes it so hard and so expensive to get in the sports betting business is the problem. Gaming protections, something that is only going to increase more and more. We're going to talk about a little bit later some federal protections that want to be added for that. Some others in that space say they want just a level playing field. The MLB, I think, raised a really interesting question is, we have all these match fixing and integrity monitoring services. You talk about a company like Genius Sports, they're in the middle of that, all these B2B operators that kind of ensure, or try as much as possible to make sure things are happening behind the scenes, are brought to light. This, because it's not gaming, this wouldn't have pretty much the same regulations. Now, obviously, you could put those rules in place there, but then you would kind of be treating it as gaming anyway, even though you're technically not calling it gaming. I thought it was really interesting. There not many arguments popped up really that I saw kind of legitimizing of why this should continue. Obviously, the administration, the acting commissioner, she's leaning towards, it seems like, creating a regulatory framework to allow this to persist. A lot of the argument for it is you want to allow innovation, allow investors more tools to invest and manage their money that way. And it should be seen, I thought one comment was really funny. It said should be seen as entertainment, which is kind of the same thing that sports betting operators say they want to be seen as. So it's going to be really interesting to see how this roundtable shakes out. And I'm really interested to see in what new voices get added to the framework besides just the companies we know doing it out there already. And then meanwhile, DraftKings and everybody else kind of waiting for a decision before they move. But we saw them do, similarly with DFS Plus, which now several of these companies are offering their own version of.
Matt, it's one of the interesting things, and Sam, I'm glad you brought it up because that was going to be my follow-up here, which is, if we regulate it like we're regulating gaming, then aren't we basically saying that it's just gaming, right? And so it's kind of this weird deal where you look at it and there has to be something done because as you guys know, as long as you've been covering the industry, as far back as any sort of industry goes with any of this stuff, if there is a way to skirt the system or mess with the system or do whatever, someone will find it and they will do it. There are bad people everywhere, and all they do is look for ways to go in and mess with things and whatever.
They're called lawyers.
Yeah, I mean, and so, Matt, that's just the interesting thing to me where it's like you can't be gaming, but we're basically looking at it saying, but we need to definitely frame it just like gaming.
Yeah, it's tough, but you know what, Matt, I would be super uncomfortable if they didn't regulate it as gaming. If that's what it comes down to, then that's great. But we better see some know your customer protections. We better see, DFS Plus had to do this. They launched and they didn't have the same kind of guardrails. And then they got them up. Sweeps, they're going through the same process right now. They launched and they didn't really have that many guardrails up, all of the operators. Some of them did, and that was great. But now they're learning that they're going to have to step up their game. Regulation is huge in sports gaming, in sports betting, and maybe in sports prediction markets. But it may wind up looking exactly like sports betting regulations do, but it'd be a bigger problem if it didn't.
And Sam, to kind of put a bow on this, you mentioned lawyers. No matter which way this goes, whether it's deemed yes or no, there's going to be There's going to be a fight one way or the other from different sides. We know that we've heard from several tribes already that are against it, right? And so we know that if the answer comes back yes, we're probably going to get some heavy opposition from the tribes who say they're the people that get to regulate stuff within the states. That's the way this is all worked out for them, and that's the way that it's written down. And if it goes no, then maybe we get some fights from the Kalshis and the whatevers and stuff of the world. So there will be lawyers regardless.
There will be lawyers. Yeah. It sounds like, reminds me of the titles of one of my favorite movies, but except you could make this about the gaming industry. And to your point, there's so much money at stake here because it's not just like a, new sports book is trying to pop up, or even a DFS website is trying to pop up, or sweepstakes. These companies pretty much just turned on the switch around January-ish and launched Super Bowl and took money, and they didn't have to spend millions and millions of dollars on a really expensive marketing partner, on building out their product, on getting a license. They just flipped a switch and were legal or available in 50 states. And they already have, their names are already really big. This wasn't a tiny niche website trying to get out there. People know what Kalshi is. People know what Predicted is, Polymarket. They famously made betting on the election okay. So there's a lot at stake for them here.
All right, Matt Waters, we do this each and every week here on the pod, our state roundup. Let's hit Texas, Mississippi, Nebraska, and Rhode Island.
Well, Texas, Matt, is getting a little more activity, but it still doesn't look like it's going to go well. We would need a constitutional amendment in Texas, and we have that on the we have that legislation now, but we know that Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick is not going to call it in the Senate if the votes aren't there. It's as simple as that. And there was another representative that said that they would make sure sports betting is dead. So it sounds pretty bad for Texas sports betting. And of course, we know that Texas only meets in odd years. So we're looking at 2027 to start the discussion again. And then if it goes to the constitutional amendment, then you're looking at 2028 to get the vote. So Texas is behind the ball, and they just can't seem to make up any ground. Mississippi is such an interesting state. Mississippi was one of the first states to go live with sports betting after PASPA fell, and they still have not branched out into online betting. A couple of the casinos have the sportsbook app where you can bet on site, but what does that matter at that point, right? People want to be able to bet from their homes on their couches.
That was the most hilarious thing when they said, when we talked about Mississippi Mobile, and it's like, hey, you can go sit in the parking garage in whatever. It's like, okay. I mean, like, yeah, cool. That's definitely mobile.
Yeah, so the House had passed legislation earlier this year, and then they just sent a couple bills back to the Senate with the sports betting language included. So it's on the Senate right now. It's going to come down to negotiations, one of the representatives said. There are a lot of local casinos that don't want that to happen in Mississippi because they'll get eaten up immediately by their customers just logging on at home, going to one of the big guys. But the legislation this time offers the availability for 2 licenses if they wanted to sign up with partners. So it's we're just gonna have to see what happens in these last couple of days here. Legislature adjourns on March 21st, so they don't have a whole lot of time to get working here. Rhode Island is another interesting one. Remember, they launched through a lottery monopoly. Their casinos are also handled by the lottery up there. All the gaming falls under their lottery. And right now the sportsbook is only under IGT's technology. And the legislators up there are trying to change that. They have a bill in that would end, they would not be allowed to renew with IGT next year when the contract is up. And then it would open up, and they would like to see at least 5 sports betting apps join the state. Hard to argue against that, right? We all know that a competitive market makes a better sports betting market. At the same time, if you're in Rhode Island, you're 20 seconds away anywhere from Massachusetts and Connecticut. So you can get the bigger guys if you want to, but it would be a good quality of life update for that market if they could get more operators into it. And then Nebraska. We really don't talk a whole lot about Nebraska. They allowed casino-style gambling, which included sports betting. Back in 2020, they approved that on the ballot. And so now they're trying to get that going as well. They're surrounded by a couple of big states, Iowa, Colorado, Kansas. They say that they're losing, I think the number was $32 million a year on taxes leaving to go to those states. So it's one of those states where I think the argument can be made, but also, it's been 4 years since they voted on that, and nothing has happened yet. So we'll have to see. There are no slam dunks waiting to go through the hoop at this point, Matt. Everything is kind of touchy, and it's all states that we've seen before, and we just know that we don't know.
Right. Yeah. This is it's crazy to think we were popping them off left and right, like when this thing first started, and then these ones that are dragging, it keeps on dragging. It keeps on dragging. So hopefully we'll have some good news for you guys out there in some of these states here at some point in the future. All right, Sam, take us home here with the Safe Betting Act rearing its ugly head yet again.
Yeah, this is the second year in a row that Senator Richard Blumenthal and Representative Paul Tonko have introduced a federal sports betting act supporting affordability and fairness with every bet act, which they're saying they've introduced kind of into the response of the mass spread of legal public betting. It would put a bunch of guardrails on the industry, very similar to the bill we saw last year that ultimately didn't really make it far in any committee. kind of that's the kicker with all this stuff is it's very unlikely that any of this stuff that's gets introduced in Congress, especially restrictions on the betting industry, goes very far. It's kind of been left up to the states for a reason. But there's other effects of it. It brings up certain things that could be adopted by the industry. It puts pressure on certain things. It gives states ideas. We've certainly seen a bunch of states introduce their own sort of anti-sports betting bills lately. But essentially what this would do, it seeks to put these advertising guardrails on sports betting ads that are on from 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. every day, saying they can't say things like risk-free, no sweat. I forget the other creative language that we've used to get there. I know we started off with like free bet, and then that wasn't okay, and then it was risk free, and then it was no sweat. So I'm sure once those all get banned, or if they ever do, there'll be some more creative thing that's made up by the great marketers at sports books. And it would also, I think, one of the really interesting parts is restrict AI use by sports books. In terms of how they gather information on their customers and push certain bets. Now, we know a bunch that's been a big kind of thing for sports books that they've kind of haven't really talked that much about, but they've kind of been excited about is using this artificial intelligence to make it easier. Let's say if you're a customer like me who, is betting on a lot of Knicks games, the first bets I'm going to see are going to be Knicks bets instead of some random, college basketball that I have never clicked on. So they've been vocal about AI that way. I think FanDuel just launched a new tool that allows customers to interact with AI to help figure out bets. So because that language isn't very clear in the bill exactly what it would prohibit, I think that's kind of something that the industry would be concerned about. Ultimately, as betting grows, sportsbooks made more revenue than ever last year, but the way that gets packaged by some lawmakers is Americans lost more money than ever. So this is something that the industry is going to have to deal with, probably they want to get in front on this stuff. That's why they've done a lot of these things like form big groups to address responsible gaming. But I would not hold my breath. I would not bet on this really passing, but introduced just ahead of March Madness. That's no coincidence. It's going to be a huge time of year for betting and also an important time of year to talk about this kind of stuff.
And Matt, just, I can't imagine people's opinions on this have changed since last year. When this came out, this was pretty much universally disliked by everybody in the industry. I can't imagine opinions have changed on this at all. There was some other stuff in there that I don't know if it's still in there or not, but I know they were like trying to ban in play as well back, in the last one and all of this. So it's just, there was a lot of things in there where, I'm all for trying to make sure that we are doing as much as we can. I think making broad sweeping changes that are unnecessary, also not good for the industry as well. So it kind of goes back into this whole deal of, do we really need something like this, or do we need to kind of just focus on issues kind of solely and then kind of move on from there?
Yeah, there's a lot of things going on with that bill, and like guardrails are great. Problem gambling, there's a lot of countries that have been doing sports betting for longer than us that do some of these things that do not allow sports betting ads during certain hours. Some of them don't allow sports betting ads on soccer shirts. So there is a lot that we can learn from those markets. It's just too late to be doing it at the federal level. If you did this 6 years ago, I could see people being more on board with it. But we've been going at this now for 7 years with no oversight like that. And the states have done a pretty good job of it. And, a lot of it is just hard to figure out how it would work. Matt, being from Nevada, you understand how loyalty clubs work. And, when you go and sit down at the blackjack table and they swipe your card, they're working off of what they call your theoretical, right? And that's coming from computer algorithms that are putting it together, looking at what you've bet in the past, looking at what you've played, looking at and coming up with a number that they think that you would play this time. Is that AI? I mean, I don't know. Right. I don't know what that would shake out to. So there's a lot in that bill that is just kind of unworkable. I think there are a couple things going on federally right now that the bill won't really have a chance to make it. But I am all for the industry coming to some agreements. I am all for states coming to some ideas, but just trying to slap a federal Band-Aid on it at this point is the wrong move.
If we want to, it's the whole deal of it's kind of new. So it's the thing that people want to pick on and they want to like kind of go in and sit there. Oh, look at this. Look at this. Do you know the lottery? It was $114 billion in the lottery in the United States last year. You know what I'm saying? Like people going in literally lighting money on fire. Like there's a 0%, almost a zero. There's a 0.00000000000 chance of ROI on the lottery and whatever. It's like, we're not worried about the 114 billion that we're spending on the lottery. We're worried about it's, again, we're the new kid on the block. People are going to still kind of pick at it and poke at it and all of that. But yes, there are always ways we can make things better. Going in and making unnecessary changes is not one of them. So we'll just continue to hope that this doesn't pass and we can get some other stuff going in the mix here to make this whole industry better. Guys, as we do each and every week, this is a podcast based off of stories over at legalsportsreport.com. So go in, read all of the word that Matt, Sam, Pat, and everybody is putting over there on the site. They are reading the stuff. They are watching the stuff. They are summarizing the things so that you don't have to. For Sam, for Matt, I am also Matt. Talk to you guys next week.